Hey art nerds, today is the start of a fun special Christmas project that I've been working on. I have several really cute designs here and I'm going to work with you step by step through December for us to color and then assemble these into adorable paper children that you can use to decorate your Christmas tree and your house this Christmas season. So if you don't know what paper children are, they're basically like paper figurines. It's a way for you to take your 2D art into the 3D world. And here are some examples of Kara paper children that I made and distributed this past summer, just to give you guys an idea of what's coming up. These are adorable, they're whimsical, they're a great way to add a little bit of extra Christmas magic to your house, and they're my way of thanking everyone for their support with 7-inch Kara's Kickstarter this past July. There'll be a download link down in the description below where you can download the line art as well as the finished watercolored piece for this if you want to print them out and assemble them yourself. I am working on Canson XL watercolor paper, and these have been inked with a Sakura Pigma FB brush pen. I'm going to be painting these illustrations using a core mini palette, but you can use whatever you like to color with. So the first thing I'm going to do in this first part of a two-part tutorial, the second part where we assemble our paper child is coming up soon. I'm going to secure this to some chipboard, and this is just the back of an old sketchbook that I saved, and it's going to give it a little bit of structure and support while I watercolor it. So as I mentioned earlier, you can use whatever supplies you like to color with for this illustration. I'm using the Core Mini palette. It's one of my favorite travel compact pocket-sized palettes. You get 12 colors, but you can mix almost any colors you want with it, and I'm very familiar with this palette. I use it a lot. So it's kind of a good go-to, easy to grab palette when I just want to do a little bit of watercolor illustration. I'm using a very watered down version of the burnt sienna for her base skin tone. And you guys might notice that her arms, or the bottom parts of her arms, are detached from the top parts of her arms. That's because she's going to be a candy cane holder, and I'll show you guys how to assemble her in the second part of this tutorial. I'm using a little bit of watered down ultramarine to shade her eyes. And once that dried, I applied a second layer of ultramarine. So now I want to mix up kind of a golden color for the bow and the tassels. But before I do that, I'm going in with a stronger mix of our burnt sienna color. And this is a wonderful color that can be useful for a wide variety of skin tones, from very light skin tones to very dark skin tones. It all just depends on how you mix it, how concentrated it is when you mix in water, and what other colors you mix in. Next, I'm applying a little bit of very watered down alizarin crimson, that's the bright red in this palette, as a blush color on her cheeks, on her lips, underneath her neck, above her eyelids, on her elbows, and on her fingers. The bow in her hair is supposed to be golden, so I mixed a little bit of our cool yellow with a little bit of the Indian yellow that's right next to it to start the base of a nice golden color. Now her dress is going to be white, so I'm using some ultramarine blue, that's the warm granulating blue that you guys see me using here, to paint the shadows of the white dress. And this paper child activity, whether it's you're coloring it with someone or you're just assembling the already colored ones or you're designing your own, is a really fun way to get creative and get crafty over a few afternoons and then create things that you can actually put up in your house and have a little bit of fun with. This can be a great activity to do with younger artists, particularly younger artists who may be home from school or may not be going to school this year, who need a little bit of extra entertainment. And it's a very low cost activity that has a lot of fun potential. I recommend, if you're going to do this at home, that you print your lineouts or your colored watercolor illustrations either onto cardstock, you want a heavier paper, or onto 90-pound watercolor paper if you want to color it with watercolors, or onto Bristol paper. And you can even find Bristol paper down at Walmart. In fact, you can find all of those papers at places like Walmart. There's no need to go to a specialty art store for the papers. So for her little vest, I mixed a little bit of sap green with some phthalo blue to get a cooler, slightly richer green. And then I'm going back and I'm reestablishing the blush on her face, on her neck, and on her fingers. And when you guys hear Bowie meowing in the background, that's my reminder from him to me to tell you guys about my Patreon, because these kind of videos are not possible without support on Patreon. You guys can help fund more videos like this, or just let me know that you enjoyed this video and want me to continue making these kind of tutorials by joining me on patreon.com/NatoSoup. And you guys will find a link to that down in the description below. Your support on Patreon means that I can use my teaching money to buy Bowie the cat food to which he's become accustomed to, and I can use the Patreon money to buy the supplies that I use either for teaching or for tutorials or for reviews. So if you enjoy the reviews I create on this channel, again, please consider supporting my work on Patreon if you aren't already. So for her vest, I mixed in a little bit more phthalo blue to get an even cooler, darker sort of shadowy blue for the vest. And for the bow and the tassels and the sequins, I mixed in a little bit more. I think it's actually a Quin Gold, not an Indian yellow, that I'm using. And this is a really warm, rich yellow color that has a lot of potential. You can get really light, warm, golden yellows to really dark, almost brown yellows. And speaking of brown, I also mix in just a little bit of burnt sienna to start getting some of those darker shadow golds. And in the green, I'm mixing in a little bit more phthalo, or a little bit in the green, I'm mixing in a little bit more phthalo blue to get some of those cooler, darker blues. So watercolor like this, the way I do watercolor, is all about slowly building up translucent layers of color. And this took about an hour to paint. I was painting on a fairly dry evening here in Southeast Louisiana, although my dehumidifier was still going. So coloring this takes a little bit of time, but not too much time. And I find watercolor is a great way to cover larger areas very quickly. If we were to use markers for this, we would get different color options, different blending options. But depending on whether we were using bullet markers or brush markers, it might take a little bit longer. So for the red stripes on her stockings, I mixed a little bit of alizarin crimson with the Quin magenta that was right next to it. So alizarin crimson is a warmer red. It's great for blush. And then magenta is a cooler pink. So when you mix the two together, you end up with what looks like a true red or a middle of the road red. If you're curious as to how this will come together, I'm going to link the other Paper Children tutorials down in the description below so you can get some inspiration and you can see where we're going with this and you can see just how fun this project is. If you think this character is cute, this is Kara, my 7-inch tall character from my comic 7-inch Kara. So she's almost to real life scale. I think she's just a little bit larger here. It just makes it easier to cut them out and to assemble them. And I thought it would also be easier for some of the younger viewers or some of the viewers who might have fine motor control issues to cut this out and assemble it. If you have a Cricut, you could just have the Cricut cut it out for you, and then you could get a kiss cut where it's perfectly cut around the line art. But I'm going to be cutting it by hand, so I'm going to do what's known as a halo cut, where we leave a little white halo around the character. It's just a little bit easier for people who have motor control issues, sometimes like myself, in fact. So for her boots, I'm mixing alizarin crimson, magenta, and the burnt sienna to get this warm, rich, dark reddish brown color. So speaking of Kara, you can read about her adventures on my webcomic, 7-inch Kara, and you can read that at 7inchkara.com. Or you can purchase the first and pre-order the second volumes of 7-inch Kara in beautiful color. It makes a wonderful Christmas present. And like I said earlier in the video, this is a thank you to the people who supported the Kickstarter. So we were kickstarting funds to offset print volume 2. That means we can print them at a lower price point, in greater volume, and at better quality. And I'm really excited about that. As I'm recording this, I'm still waiting on the printer, Versa, to get back to us with an ETA on when they're going to have those printed books for us. But I'm really looking forward to receiving those books and seeing what the final printed book looks like. So at this point, I have all of the base colors, all of the local colors established, so I'm just working on building up shadows. So, for example, on the white dress, I applied another layer of ultramarine blue, just slightly thicker. On the skin, I'm working with progressively darker, more saturated mixes of our burnt sienna. And I also dotted on little freckles, since Kara has freckles, and I happen to think freckles are really cute. But when you color your own, you can choose to color these characters however you want them, or you can draw your own, and you could draw your own characters, or you could draw yourself or your siblings. It's really up to you. Let your imagination run wild and have fun with this activity. So since she has reddish brown hair, I'm starting with a base of our burnt sienna, and it's a pretty loose mixture, a pretty light mixture, a little bit darker than the skin tone, but not as dark as I'm eventually going to get. When it comes to watercolor, you want to begin with your lightest, your least saturated mixes first, and then gradually build up saturation. So I've applied a more saturated mix of burnt sienna to her hair, and I'm trying to leave highlights where the light is hitting her hair. So it's not just all one uniform layer of brown, but we have different layers of brown. Since we're working with a limited palette of 12 colors, I've got to do a little bit of color mixing. I don't mind. Like I said earlier, I'm very familiar with this palette. And to get a darker brown, I've mixed some of the burnt umber with the burnt sienna. And then to get the darkest brown of all, I mixed in a little bit of Payne's Gray, which is all the way at the end, in with our burnt umber and burnt sienna mix. And that gives us a color that's almost black. So we're just about done painting this. I want to point out that this has been time-lapsed a couple of times, so by about 4x. So if you don't paint this fast, don't worry, I don't either. I've also removed all the gaps in time where I'm just waiting for paint to dry. So this is a great activity if you're painting along. This is a great activity to do while you're watching a movie, or maybe you're scrolling on Twitter, or maybe you're working on some other project on the side. So I'm going to allow her to dry fully, and then I'm going to add white gouache here and there. Now, if you're not familiar with white gouache, gouache is an opaque watercolor. It's available in a wide variety of colors, and it's available in different formats as well, from the jelly gouache, which is quite popular here on YouTube, to gouache cakes, and to tubes of gouache like what I'm using here. And I mostly just use gouache to add highlights to things. I'm not a big gouache painter, but gouache is a medium in and of itself. And like watercolor, it is water activated. It uses water as the solvent, so it could be a good medium for people who are looking for a less toxic art form to enjoy. So now that we've finished with the gouache, this is what the painted piece looks like. But keep in mind, we're not finished. We still have to cut this out and assemble it. And that's going to be in part 2. So I hope you guys are looking forward to that. And I hope you guys will tune in for that. It's coming up soon. And all that's left for today's tutorial is to remove the blue tape, and for me to scan this so you guys have a color version of this as well. So removing the blue tape, because we only tape the top and bottom, is fairly simple. You're going to want to pull away from your illustration at a 90-degree angle just to keep it from tearing. You could have used washi tape for this if you wish, but I like that blue tape is much more affordable than washi tape, and it comes in thicker sizes. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope you'll stick around for part 2 where we assemble our paper child. Merry Christmas!